I'm really honored to introduce two good friends, EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy and NARUC President, the Honorable Colette Honorable. Both Gina and Colette have threatened me that if I don't call them Gina and Colette, they will kick me, which I appreciate very much. So I will tell you that both Gina and Colette have risen to national prominence after distinguished careers at the state level. I first got to know Gina in the early 1990s in Boston. It's a trade secret. Probably a few of you know that Gina actually has some roots in Boston. You may get a better sense of that shortly. After leading Connecticut's Department of Environmental Protection, Administrator McCarthy joined the US EPA as the Assistant Administrator for Air and Radiation in 2009, and then was appointed and confirmed to the role of Administrator in 2013. Colette Honorable was elected Chairman of the Arkansas PUC after serving on that commission since 2007. She has also been elected to the board as President and CEO of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners in 2013. So we are now going to enter into a little interaction about this rulemaking that is underway. I can start off and ask both of our speakers just to say a few words, and then we will kick it off. So Gina, you want to take the lead and share a little bit with us?
First, Jason, it's great to be here. It's great to be in front of everybody this morning. Colette, always. It's wonderful to be here, and I want to thank you most particularly for helping to engage the energy world in the issues that we're working on, because I think both Colette and I know that energy and environment are really two sides of the same coin. And we've been working hard to make sure that we bridge that gap and get a good understanding of the flexibilities that states are looking for and the kind of carbon pollution standards we can deliver. The President made it really clear in his climate action plan that EPA had a significant role to play in the development of many of our actions, but in particular the 111B and the 111D rules. And his challenge to us was to make sure that we were crafting those rules in a way that would really be supportive of a vibrant 21st century economy. So what that really means, I think, to all of us is that we have to figure out how the design of those rules can really move states forward, can understand the energy plans that they have, the way they're looking at their energy supply, as well as we are looking at a national opportunity to reduce carbon and face what we believe to be one of the most significant public health challenges of our time. And so the joy of working with Colette is that she's been able, among others in the energy world, to help provide us tremendous advice. As many of you know, we've done significant outreach on the 111D proposal in particular, doing more than 300 meetings, getting input from 10,000 people already, even before we sent the rule over to begin interagency review. But that's where it is at this point. And I think my goal is, having been from the state, as Jason indicated, my goal is not to supplant what the states are doing, but to support it. It's to be able to look at states and the leadership they have provided and to try to translate that into opportunities for us, opportunities to get to a really good, clean, vibrant 21st century economy. And that's the goal for all of us. I think climate change threatens that, or else we wouldn't be doing these carbon pollution standards. But I think if we work together, we'll find a way to move all of this forward and drive the innovation that we're all looking for that will provide all of us a secure and safe future. Thanks.
Thank you, Gina. Colette.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. It really is a delight to be here with you. I told Gina, she's got me beat, though. She has quite a few engagements today, even. I have quite a few this week. But it's really a delight to be here with you, certainly to be here with our friends at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Jason is a dear friend, and it's a pleasure to see Senator Dorgan. I worked on the energy project, which was really a breath of fresh air. And Margot helped to hurt us when we were led astray from time to time on some of the issues. But there are so many people that are passionate about this work. It's important work. And Ralph Cavanagh, I think, kind of helped to bridge the gap. So I think our work collectively is another example of a way in which we can collaborate. I agree with Gina. This work is not mutually exclusive. There's so much that we can do when we do it together. I want to also publicly acknowledge Gina for your leadership. Gina certainly isn't a stranger to us at NARUC. She's fearless, and she would come and take us all on even before she was administrator. It really has been a privilege to engage with her. I mentioned to Jason ahead of our beginning this morning that, and by the way, you're getting a demonstration about the differences in accents this morning. You got Boston on the right and my southern slow accent here on the left. But I was mentioning to Jason that what really hit home for me in terms of the new effort to bridge this gap of environment and economic regulation was a meeting that we held, I believe it was an unprecedented meeting at the White House, with all of the energy principles in the Obama administration and the NARUC Executive Committee. And we plan to go there and to take our resolution on 111D. I hope to talk a little bit more about that in our discussion. And Dan Utek from the White House said, we have the resolution and we want to thank you for it. So they were on top of it. We're speaking the same language, and my message is that I hope that the states can be helpful in this work that Gina has ahead of her. I don't see any need to reinvent the wheel. I want to thank my colleagues at NARUC. Those commissioners in the room, will you raise your hand? We have quite a few here today. Thank you. There are some commissioners emeritus in the room as well. Thank you. There are so many commissioners across the country who represent diverse states, regions, fuel mixes, states who are well ahead of many others in terms of renewable energy standards work, methane emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and now energy efficiency programs. And so we have so many tools in our toolkit. We too have been delighted to engage more significantly on this issue of 111D, not only with Gina and her team, and they've been at every single one of our meetings recently, and I hope that they will be at our next one in July.
You guys are going to be meeting in secret soon, just to keep us
That's
out.
right, that's right. But also with industry, with EEI, with so many players who are very interested in these issues as well. So I look forward to the dialogue, and thank you, Jason, for getting us together one more time.
Well, it is terrific to be flanked by two women who are both triple threats. Incredibly smart, incredibly strategic, and shockingly friendly. It is a powerful advocacy combination that I commend to all of you over the course of the next several months.
It's disarming. You don't see us
But since
coming.
this is going to be a friendly conversation, Gina, I thought I would just start out by saying, so you got that notice of proposed rulemaking in?
I did.
What's it say? I'm just kidding. More seriously, you mentioned that you've been on a kind of a whirlwind tour, and really it has been unprecedented outreach. I'm just wondering, what surprised you? What have you learned through these discussions that you didn't anticipate going in?
I think I don't think that the broad interest surprised me. I mean, clearly this is an important rule. It needs to be incredibly smartly crafted. Smart. See, now I'm from
My
Boston.
son has
Now
the
you
same
can-
issue.
I've given it away already. Smartly crafted to make sure that it provides the flexibilities that states need while we're continuing to provide, the kind of impetus for carbon pollution reductions that we need. I'm not sure that I was surprised it may be pleasantly surprised, frankly, at the tone of the discussion. I am incredibly pleased with the way in which the discussion has been both respectful as well as engaging in a positive way. I found, the meetings did not spend time talking about the science of climate. It was not about climate denial. It was about the fact that many states understand that the climate is changing. They are concerned about it. They want to take action, but they want to make sure that the action is measured and flexible enough that the states can continue to do their things. States that are out in front can continue to be there and get rewarded for that and recognized for it, while states that haven't yet gone down this road can craft a way to do that in a time frame that will be meaningful for them. and that will provide them the opportunity to gear up and do things that they believe are useful to their energy system as well as our collective environments. So I guess the surprise was that it's gone better than I expected in terms of being a very positive engagement and providing us with a ton of things to think about, which is probably the downside as well. We've had to do a lot of thinking about this. But the good news is it is an interagency review, and it really is, I think, the kickoff of the next round of discussions. There's no way we're going to end with a proposal.
You're going to be on the road for a while.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then we'll have a lot more concrete stuff to really talk about and work through. I'm kind of looking forward to that.
So Colette, you mentioned that there's been an unprecedented amount of engagement with NARUC, which I think was an acronym that not everybody in this town knew prior to the last several months. Flash forward a little bit. You mentioned that the kind of engagement of the economic and the environmental and the power regulators is different. Do you see that having a lasting effect as we move forward, not only to implement this rule, but just in terms of the way states think about the energy environment connection going forward?
Indeed. And I might take a moment to just advise those attending that this year NARUC is celebrating its 125th birthday. We were formed in 1889, and we're comprised of economic regulators, regulators of public utilities, and this work touches every household, every business. And so we are very proud at NARUC to support the work of our member states and U.S. territories. But getting to your question, what do I see in the future? I think it's a completely new day. At NARUC, our outreach has been both internal and external. Internally, we have not only our task force on energy regulation and generation that's been working very diligently, led by Chairman Appel of Colorado and Commissioner Littell of Maine, very diverse group of participants. Our electric committee, our electricity committee, our energy resources and the environment committee, even committees such as our clean coal subcommittee, and members throughout NARUC are very interested in working daily, literally, on these issues with our team at NARUC headed up by Holly Smith and Chuck Gray. So the work that we are doing internally is very different. The engagement that we've had with Gina singularly, it's refreshing, quite frankly, but also with her team. We've met with them at a number of meetings, workshops. Our regions have met. We've had conference calls. It's unlike anything I've ever witnessed with any organization, let alone a federal agency.
So thinking forward, talk a little bit about the role of the RTOs, the transmission organizations, both in the kind of rulemaking process, but also how significant a role do you think those kinds of institutions are going to have in implementation?
Well, I'll be a bit political and say that we have to see what the rule says first. But certainly, I think, too, in our resolution that NARUC issued in November of 2013, we requested that EPA consider giving the states the flexibility to fashion solutions that work for them in their respective borders based on the diverse fuel mixes around the country, but also regional efforts. It could be a RGGI solution that's offered. It could be one that contemplates, for instance, the proposal put forward by the RTO ISO Council. So my point is that the states are open, but I think we have to see what the rule says in order to be able to fashion a response thereto.
Jason, could I just add that I know that I can't be telling what the rule says, so at least kick me if you think I'm getting on the verge of doing that, because
that's going to happen. Yeah,
I'm
going to definitely shut that down.
I did bring a copy. You can get copies of the proposed rule that's sitting outside. But I did want to say that I think the energy world as a whole, including the ISOs and the RTOs, are going to have to be a strong voice in this, whether or not they're an active participant, because the president made it really clear, and I think we've said it over and over, and one of the reasons why we're doing so much outreach to the energy world is nothing we do can threaten reliability. We have to recognize that in a changing climate like the one we've recently been experiencing, it is an increasing challenge to maintain a reliable energy supply.
Indeed.
And so we have to get this right. His idea of putting out a climate change plan was not to have a bunch of individual actions that each of the federal offices and agencies went in their own little huddle and came out with. It had to be comprehensive. He's forcing the discussion at the federal level if need be, and he's demanding that we make sure that we reach out to the folks at the states and the regions who really know the intricacies of the energy supply and can help us understand how you'd frame an environmental rule that was informed by that and that would support the efforts that states are taking. So this is going to have to, they're going to have to be an important voice whether or not they're part of the exact solution and actions that come out.
I agree, Gina, and two, let me applaud the president on this work. And certainly the regions will have a role to play. The nuance here is something that we as economic regulators have been dealing with since 1889. Who's on first? And so the states, this is something we address in our resolution as well. We ask EPA to, and I appreciate your recognition of assuring reliability first and foremost. The states are the sole entities with jurisdiction over things such as resource adequacy, those sorts of things. And so we have done this work very well alongside our regional entities, which are under the purview of FERC, and we will continue to do so. And I agree, the regional, the RTOs, the ISOs undertake such significant work, not only in building out our transmission infrastructure, but ensuring that the generation is where it needs to be in those states where there are members who participate in RTOs, ISOs. But we can't allow utility regulators, and I don't think they will or should or can, to check that duty that they have. It's a duty that they have to their states and ratepayers. And so it's something that I think we'll continue to work through.
So we've been kind of dancing around this little concept called federalism, which of course has been a bit of a challenge for the nation over the last 250 years. And while I think there's clear recognition that the statute contemplates the states having the fundamental obligation on implementation, you are going to be putting out some guidance. There are going to be some expectations. And I wonder, Gina, if you can just speak broadly, are there kind of the rudiments of a state plan, recognizing all of the flexibility and the collaboration and the regionalism? Can you think about, is there a framework that you're thinking about which will be something that you'll be looking for across the board?
Yeah, we'll be teeing up a number of ideas and taking comment on what state plans should look like and the timing for those state plans. Because we've heard two things. One is it going to have to look like other state plans in the Clean Air Act? How are we going to get them done in the time frame that the president is interested in? And also, how do we allow adjustments in that plan over time? Because one of the other issues that we heard was that states are interested in time frames that are achievable over the long term. And so it presents a challenge to us, but the good thing about 111D is it's the good and the bad. It's not very well defined because it hasn't been used that many times. There is enormous flexibility in the definition of a state plan and our ability to look at the timeline for achieving that, for submitting the plans and for achieving the reductions. And we're going to take full advantage of that in this proposal so that we can have more concrete discussions as we move forward. So we know what the fundamentals of a plan has to be. It needs to be concrete enough for understand that states will, over time, be able to achieve the guidance that EPA issues. But it is an absolute collaboration between the federal and state government. This is a partnership if there ever was one. And so we're going to treat it that way. We're going to nurture it. We're going to listen. And in the end, we're going to find a program that we all can embrace.
So let's talk a little bit about timing. I mean, how much anxiety is there at the state level? Because as Gina points out, this is a collaboration, which is of course a blessing and a curse, but there's going to be a lot of work to do. State resources are, I think, not in wonderful shape. The federal government doesn't have the same kind of resources to provide support. State budgets are tight. What's your sense? Do the states have a sense of the window that you hope you'll have to work through implementation and the kind of iterative process Gina discusses?
Let me say first, I don't envy the job that Gina and her team have here, but from a state perspective, it's tight at best. I can assure you that all of us in June of this year will be waiting day by day for this rule to drop, for the guidance to come out. Quite frankly, we've urged our colleagues to reach out to their environmental regulators. We've done that in Arkansas because we know that we simply will not have time to begin from scratch. We've already met with our utilities. We've had joint meetings with our environmental regulatory team, economic regulatory. Eddie Moore from my office is here, and he's carrying the ball on all of this work in Arkansas. It's very important for the economic regulator, if you haven't already, to begin reaching out, begin informing the environmental regulator about the work happening at your PUC, your PSC, because we will have to move very, very quickly in June of 2014 to be able to propose some work the following year. So it's a very, very tight timeline. And when I mentioned that it's a new day, it's certainly a new day because we are engaging with our colleagues at the environmental regulatory commissions and departments like never before. Very different from the work with 111B, very different from the work with MATS and so many other efforts. It's a very good thing. And quite frankly, I think it's something that should have happened before now. But we have to work very quickly on a whole new dynamic, a whole new regime, an entirely new way of thinking about the work that we do. And it also impacts industry in the same way. So it's a very short timeline.
So let's follow up on that. We've been talking a little bit about the timing as it relates to states, but I see my friend Quinn Shea. And there's a lot of concern about and questions about technology cycles.
Yeah.
The statute explicitly contemplates this idea of useful life, which of course are two nice words, useful and life. When you put them together, they're nice. What do they mean, Gina, as you think about the obligation to put the rules together in ways that understand technology cycles, try to avoid stranded assets? Not an easy task, but how are you thinking about those different challenges?
I think what you just stated is exactly what it means. It means taking a look at how you can provide and what opportunities for flexibility that we have to ensure that the goals can be met in a variety of different ways, that they don't exclusively need to be met by putting very expensive technology on facilities that won't be around for a while. And I think that we heard ultimate sensitivity about that issue when we were out and about who's going to be responsible for all of these reductions. This is a new day in many ways, as as Colette indicated. There's challenges with this rule, but for every challenge, there's tremendous opportunity. When you find when one thing doesn't make sense, a couple of others might. And one of the things that's very encouraging, I think, is the expertise at the state level in many of these issues, as well as the fact that states have been doing integrated resource planning. They sort of know where they want to head. And in many ways, if you do an environmental rule that regulates carbon, if you can follow where the states are heading and underpin that with significant carbon pollution reductions, then you've got your answer, and it's apparent, and it should be clear, and we should be able to figure this out.
So let me press on this a little bit, because a few of you have been at this work for a while.
Yep.
You can't go to a meeting of power sector CEOs and not hear one way or another that all of our goals are aligned, and if we could just be given the time to respect those technology cycles so that we can retire the facilities we want to retire, we could achieve these goals much more cost effectively. And intuitively, who could argue with that? But then I flash back to 1970, and I was alive and walking. And the basic idea of the Clean Air Act was just that, right? We're going to provide some time because all of these facilities were on the verge of retiring, so we weren't going to bolt unnecessary pollution control equipment onto those facilities, and then we were going to look to the future. Welcome to the future, right? We're looking at many of those same facilities today. So how do you think about those two aspirations? And does 111D give the agency, in kind of collaborating, the opportunity to really get that right for the first time? Are you afraid that we're going to be looking at the same facilities with more?
I'm not sure the agency got it wrong the first time, but, you know, I understand your point, and you know, I think the challenge of doing a carbon pollution standard is that this carbon pollution standard is going to be federally enforceable. It is going to be a requirement. It is not going to be an aspirational goal that if everything else goes right, it ought to happen. We are going to be looking at the state plans to determine whether or not they are conforming with the guidance and getting the significant carbon pollution reductions that are going to be required. We're going to make them cost effective. We're going to make them make sense. We're going to recognize individual states are in different places and regions are in different places, but we're not going to rely on an aspirational goal that if integrated resource planning goes well, then things should happen in the way we want them to happen. So in many ways, it's going to be, you know, the challenge that you've given to us is be as flexible as possible. But that doesn't mean it's going to be so flexible that I won't be able to rely on this as a federally enforceable rule to deliver carbon pollution reductions at the level that our guidance indicates.
All right, now we're talking. All right, so Colette, the NARUC resolution said a number of important things. But one thing it clearly said was, hey, we have momentum.
Indeed.
We have momentum because of good planning. We have momentum because of changing geology, which has provided incredible amounts of natural gas, which is transforming the industry in ways we didn't imagine. And the basic gist, as I took away from the resolution, was this stuff should count.
Indeed.
So how do you think about that? That raises really challenging questions about when do you start counting, raises questions about measurement and enforceability. And if everything counts, will anything new have been accomplished? So how do you talk about the early reduction issue?
Indeed. So I think Reggie is a great example. The first formal effort of a region to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Excellent work. Our colleagues in the Northeast are leaders indeed. I'm smiling at Gene Fox. However, we aren't saying let everything count. We're simply saying, EPA, let's not reinvent the wheel here. There's so much great work already happening. Robust energy efficiency resource standards across the country where we are. Let me tell you, I'm learning more about EM&V than I ever thought I would know or care to know in my lifetime. We are working very diligently on renewables. If you ask my utilities, they will tell you I'm asking about that. What are you doing in terms of planning for renewables through our integrated resource planning process? So we aren't saying let's throw it all up against the wall and see what sticks. We are saying we have demonstrated, proven cleaner energy offerings that it would be a shame not to acknowledge. Allow these efforts that have been going on across the country to support the work that Gina is speaking of. And I agree with Gina. There's no reason why we can't find these solutions as we've worked diligently on them in the past. Now, timing is going to be an issue. Getting to the nuts and bolts of, do we need a common standard for measurement of energy efficiency savings, those sorts of things. We will have to work through those issues. Will there be common standards for renewables and how those might count? Distributed or demand response efforts and how other renewables programs throughout the country will play a part. That's the hard part. But that's also the part that we as economic regulators are very committed to. I feel compelled to mention this effort about how do you wind down or shut down these coal plants where there have been investments. All of these sorts of things will play into this effort. The economic regulator's role is to ensure safe, reliable utility service at just and reasonable rates. So we only approve those costs that are necessary for the operation of utility service and are used and useful. So we acknowledge that there's a lot of this work that will complement and support the EPA work, but our work in the first instance is to ensure reliable, affordable, and safe utility service.
Well, we're going to come back in a minute on the efficiency and DR renewables. I think that obviously is a critical question going forward. But Gina, the politics of early reductions are tough. I mean, it's very hard to say, here's the line, it's May 15th, May 13th, sorry, May 17th, you're good to go. We saw it in the 1603B when everyone could, hey Dave, everyone could put early reduction regulations into the register. It just became a kind of crazy hot mess. We both spent some time in the Northeast, universal victims from the jet stream, always felt like we were a little ahead of the game, no good deed goes unpunished. We know how people in different parts of the country feel like, which is, hey, you guys have the easy ride, it's all falling on us. I mean, when a governor from a state that feels like it is leading the country comes in and says, how can you not give me credit for this? How hard is it to say because?
You're beginning to depress me, Jason. It's very early in the morning. We should try to keep things a little lighter.
The arc's gonna go like this. We're gonna end on a really big upswing.
Well, I think, I think our challenge is to try to respond very positively to what we've heard from the states, which is that every state's not in the same place. And you should recognize that. And every state does not have the same opportunities for reductions, and you need to recognize that. We also need to make sure that people understand that we're trying to do a 111D proposal. We're not trying to develop a cap and trade program, which are two very different things. So it's not only the challenge of how you look at early reductions and capture those, but the challenge is also to stay within the legal constraints of 111D. So it's not unlimited or unbridled flexibility. And EPA is not using its own vision of what the energy world looks like. We're looking at what the energy world is. We're looking at what people tell us who know the energy world best, where it's heading. And we're trying to find the opportunities for the carbon pollution reductions that we need.
So I want to talk a little bit about the implementation. No one litigates. We're moving forward.
Well,
No one litigates.
Now I'm happy again.
Colette, I want to kind of think about two topics together. So you talked a little bit about energy efficiency, renewables. I mean, integrating and finding ways to make these kind of apples to apples has always been tricky. My assumption is that once these rules are in place, EPA is going to be working pretty hard to put together and support some kind of model rules, model guidance, to at least give states the opportunity to opt into something that creates that baseline. Is that a fair assumption? And are you already working on it?
It's a fair assumption that folks have asked us to look at a variety of tools that EPA is pretty familiar with and states are. There are terrific models of success that are both just individual state efforts as well as regional efforts. And we're looking at those flexibilities, and we see great opportunities to be able to provide some really stable platform for those discussions to kick off.
And Colette, recognizing the pride that many states have in doing things their way, which is always a little better than anybody else's, how much appetite do you think there's going to be at the state level to opt in, to embrace the kinds of templates EPA is putting together? How much enthusiasm will there be? As we've seen in the RPS, everyone likes RPS, and then everyone has their own little wiggle for their own particular circumstance. I mean, how do you imagine that playing out? Will we have a uniform, tradable, flexible framework, or are we going to be trying to reconcile all kinds of different rules?
I too am an optimist, and I hope that NARUC will be able to inform that process of whether we're able to find a happy meeting place. The truth is, we're a very diverse group of states. So you just made a statement that everyone likes an RPS. No. Some of my colleagues may not so much, and some of my colleagues might say a few other things about being optimistic about this rule going forward. Gina may have encountered some of them. Our work at NARUC is aimed at not only educating our members, but advocating where we have a consensus. But we are always committed to that, and I think our resolution is a beautiful example of the effort to bring together states like a Colorado, a Maine, a Kentucky, a West Virginia. My goodness, it's incredible to me that we were able to come up with something upon which we could all agree and offer that to the EPA in a constructive, informative way. In like fashion, I'm hopeful that we can with regard to proposing solutions for what these standards might be. We have folks who are very learned in these areas, very experienced colleagues who are very committed to this work, and we are also supported by a number of research institutes and others. I won't name one because then I'd have to name them all, who are committed to working in this area and supporting the work of the states and offering solutions as well. That will be a very difficult effort, but I think we are all committed to it, and I really am hopeful that we can offer standards and solutions where we've reached some level of consensus in a way that is helpful to the EPA as well.
So let me follow up a little bit on energy efficiency.
Very good.
What kinds of activities are underway that you are most optimistic about? And do you think there are things that NARUC, that EPA can do to kind of embrace, accelerate those going forward? How big an aspect of compliance do you think will come through energy efficiency?
I think it will be a tremendous aspect. Certainly the work happening in Vermont is a great example. Oregon, the Oregon Energy Trust, I have to wave the Arkansas banner in the South and Southeast. Our energy efficiency programs have really informed and influenced work in surrounding states. This work, quite frankly, is a win-win-win. It's a win for consumers, clearly, the lowest cost form of energy. It's a win for industry. They're having to spend less on investing in these very expensive power plants, which leave us with these questions later, potentially, for those emitting certain types of pollutants. And finally, it's a win for the environment. And so we really, I think, should hold up our energy efficiency programs as the best we have to offer alongside our renewable work. But our work in energy efficiency is something to which many states have been very committed. And I have to also give credit to industry, who've really put their all into executing robust, proven programs with great results. So I'm hopeful that these EE programs, and they're different across the country, but that they offer the best resource that we have to offer.
But I also want to recognize that, Arkansas is doing great work because of you,
Thank
and
you,
because Teresa Mock,
Yes,
who
my
is the
colleague.
president at the Environmental Council of States, is running the Environment Department there. The collaboration between the energy and environmental world is essential for us to tackle these issues. I know I met many of you when we were talking about RGGI when I was first in Massachusetts and then in Connecticut. It was a startling opportunity for me to see how much we didn't know about one another, even though we were working in exactly the same issues for so long.
Indeed.
But also to understand the value of the collaboration between environment and energy. And I love Arkansas because when people are saying, oh, all this hoo-ha stuff only happens in the coast, I can say, no, Arkansas does some of this
Thank
too.
you, Gina.
It's just, it's been a great collaborative effort, and it's the kind of thing that we hope will continue to grow. It'll be everybody's advantage that happens.
And on this point, so in one day, I happened to be in DC and called upon Gina and went to visit her and learned that Teresa Marks, the environmental regulator from Arkansas, had been in earlier that day. So it's I think, a testament to how this world is changing. More importantly, it's a testament to the dedication that Gina has exhibited, and that we think and know that we can call upon her to engage on these important issues. I think it makes all the difference in this work going forward, as we're committed to being optimistic about the future, but also committed to working on the more difficult tasks that lay ahead.
So Gina, you just mentioned, and we've all experienced this in our lives, you're working in a state, close proximity to people with similar obligations, and yet you almost never talk to each other. Yeah. You also mentioned the word interagency process, and you actually smiled when you said it, which is unusual, since the interagency process is often not viewed with such affection. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, especially on energy efficiency, on reliability, DOE, FERC, EPA, I mean, how are you grappling?
Well, I think that we understood that because this rule is so intimately tied to the energy world, that we needed to be closely aligned with DOE and with FERC in the design of this, not just waiting for the interagency review process to pop up comments. Had we done that, it would have been a serious mistake. So we didn't go out and do so much outreach to ignore the inreach. So we have done, I think, a really good job at trying to work with DOE and pick their brains and make sure that what we were designing, that they would agree with our projections, our analysis, and our way of framing the issues and the opportunities. And the same with FERC. Now, Jason, I feel like we're presenting a little bit of a rosy picture, and I think everybody knows that I'm a stark realist. I know the challenge that we're having, but we couldn't be better positioned at this point to put out something that keeps the conversation going. One of the reasons why we're doing so much outreach is just a recognition that this is a difficult issue. And the only thing I really hope when this proposal goes out is that people will look at it and say, EPA listened. EPA did what they were supposed to do. They challenged the full range of ideas. They've put out lots of questions, and they are willing in the comment process to get to a final that might look different than the proposal because it is informed by the further discussion. I think many times we get criticized because there's so much change between proposal and final. That's when I dance in the streets, because I think that's exactly what it's supposed to be, because you put concrete ideas on instead of lofty discussions, and you start digging into what really matters to people is all the details. And so I'm pretty excited to get this out of interagency, to get folks looking at this, and to know that we listened and there's lots more room for improvement.
I love the idea when federal officials will indicate that evolving thinking and change is actually a sign of courage and not
great.
weakness. It's a conversation we should have more often, especially on Capitol Hill.
It's called democracy, I think.
It sure is.
Amen.
So we're winding up. I guess I want to ask each of you just to share some final thoughts. What's the one idea you want to leave this very informed and attentive crowd with?
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for being here. Today is really an example of what Gina just mentioned. It's working on these details. We're very committed to this work. We live and breathe it. And therefore, it's important for us as economic regulators to not only be in the room, but to engage in a significant and meaningful way to help resolve these issues. To do that, we certainly have engaged tremendously with Gina and her team. And I agree with her. I am an optimist, but I'm realistic about the challenges that lie ahead. I'm also realistic about the fact that some of my colleagues will continue to have concerns about reliability as we continue this work. It means that we have to double down and do an even better job of thinking about every possibility, about every strategy. And I'm very confident in the work of my colleagues at NARUC, and also confident about those in industry who are on the front lines doing this work. And last but not least, very confident about our engagement with Gina and her team going forward.
Just final word is always to thank Colette and NARUC and all of our other colleagues in the energy world for all their work they're doing on this, but also to thank you, Jason. We've been working for a long time in the same arena. You've always been incredibly helpful, but I think we both share an interest in making sure that environmental issues aren't seen as partisan issues. You're here at the Bipartisan Policy Center for a reason, because you believe as strongly in the process of democracy as I do, and the way of listening to different voices. And I think the most important thing that I want states to know, whether you're in environmental world or the energy world, is that the most important thing is that we all try to find ways of serving the people that we're serving most effectively. And that means giving them some real opportunities to address climate change, which is a threat to their public health and the environment, but also that we find the most cost-effective ways to align that with a really robust 21st century economy and an energy system that can support that. And if we just keep that in mind and try to get the partisan politics out and find ways in each state to define a path forward that can get to those goals, I think we'll do just fine.
All right, well, let me thank both our panelists. We really could not be in better hands. I think this has been a tremendous beginning to now what's going to be a day of some good, engaging detail. And so if we can just have a round of applause for President Honorable Administrator McCarthy. I want to just say a few words about where we go from here and Bipartisan Policy Center's interests. As you know, this is the last of our scheduled forums, but we have a lot of meetings at the Bipartisan Policy Center, and there have been a number of suggestions over the course of the last several months of issues that folks would like to kind of bear down on a little bit, maybe in a somewhat smaller room. We have really been delighted at our partnership with NARUC and would look forward to working with any of you if there are other issues, whether they're public or private forums. We are also thinking about having another discussion in a big room after the rulemaking comes out. We can all, maybe we'll do an open reading or something that allows us to
Gina has
focus
to
on
do
the
her dance.
pros and cons. The Bipartisan Policy Center is also, as many of you know, and are also working to do some different kinds of economic modeling to lay out some different imaginations of scenarios. We're going to be presenting some more work publicly in May. Our goal in doing that is not to tell anybody what the answer is, but to challenge anybody to come up with a better idea. And we hope that this exercise will continue to have a kind of dynamic and public conversation, since that's what we always hope to spark. We're going to move into the panels. We're going to be taking questions on those note cards. I will also note that those of you in the atmosphere can tweet questions at bpc.bipartisan, and we will be bringing that into the conversation. And so it's now my pleasure to bring up the next panel. Great pleasure to introduce the moderator of that panel, Senator Byron Dorgan. Byron has been a dear friend and leader of the work at the BPC on energy policy for the last several years. As a result, I've had many opportunities to introduce Senator Dorgan. In a desire to keep it fresh, I dug a little deeper this time through the wonders that are known as Wikipedia. It turns out Senator Dorgan was the youngest constitutional officer ever elected in the state of North Dakota. He began his career also deeply engaged in state issues as the North Dakota State Tax Commissioner. So when you understand the kind of the optimism, the kind of jovial spirit that Senator Dorgan brings, the calm and reserve, you can understand that it started out as the tax commissioner for more than a couple years there in North Dakota. You can also always count on Senator Dorgan for at least one Garrison Keillor quote. So I'm giving you notice. But we want to now begin the panel on state successes. We're going to be joined by the senator and a number of our leading PUC commissioners, and look forward to a very engaging day. So thank you both.